On the morning of May 23, 1982, 18-year-old Melinda Aguilar was in her Houston apartment when she heard her roommate Lori Lister screaming outside. Lister had just returned from work and was being attacked in the stairwell. When Aguilar rushed to help, a powerful man grabbed her by the throat and choked her until she lost consciousness. When she came to, her hands were tied behind her back with wire, and the attacker was dragging Lister's limp body up the stairs toward the bathroom. Aguilar could hear water running, filling the bathtub. She understood immediately what was about to happen. Making a split-second decision that would save both their lives, she jumped from a second-story window and screamed for help. Neighbors called police, who arrived in time to pull Lori Lister from the bathtub before she drowned and arrest the man trying to kill her. His name was Coral Eugene Watts, and he may have been the most prolific serial killer in American history, responsible for the deaths of more than 80 women across multiple states and Canada. Coral Eugene Watts was born on November 7, 1953, at Fort Hood, Texas, to Richard Watts, a private first class in the Army, and Dorothy Mae Young, an 18-year-old kindergarten art teacher. He acquired the nickname Coral because his southern relatives pronounced Carl with a drawn-out accent, and he liked the way it sounded. When Watts was less than 2 years old, his parents divorced. Dorothy moved him to Inkster, Michigan, where she eventually married Norman Caesar, a mechanic, with whom she had 2 daughters. By all outward appearances, Watts had a stable home life, but something dark was developing inside him. At age 13, Watts contracted meningitis, a serious infection that may have affected his neurological development. He struggled academically, eventually being held back in 8th grade. Psychological evaluations later revealed he had a full-scale IQ of 75, placing him in the borderline range of intellectual functioning, though law enforcement officers who later interrogated him described him as very, very intelligent, with an excellent memory. Watts himself later claimed that around age 12, he began fantasizing about torturing and killing young women and girls, and that he started stalking girls during his adolescent years. Investigators believe he may have committed his first murder before he turned 15. At 15 years old, Watts attacked a woman while delivering newspapers in Detroit. He beat her severely, later explaining he did it because he felt like it. The woman managed to fend him off, and Watts was arrested and sent to Lafayette Clinic in Detroit for psychiatric evaluation. He was diagnosed with delusional thought processes and released after several months. In 1973, he graduated high school and received a football scholarship to Lane College in Jackson, Tennessee. He excelled as an athlete and even became a Golden Gloves boxer, but after just 3 months, he was expelled from the college. The official reasons were stalking and assaulting women, but there was another factor. Many at Lane College suspected Watts in the brutal stabbing death of a female student, though there was insufficient evidence to charge him. After his expulsion, Watts drifted, working briefly as a mechanic in Houston before enrolling at Western Michigan University in Kalamazoo in 1974. It was there that his confirmed killing spree began. On October 30, 1974, 19-year-old Western Michigan University student Gloria Steele was found in her apartment, stabbed 33 times. The case went cold. Over the next 6 years, Watts killed repeatedly across Michigan, though investigators didn't yet recognize they were hunting a serial predator. His victim selection appeared random but followed a pattern he alone understood. He targeted predominantly young, attractive white women, often with long hair, though he also killed at least 2 black women and 1 Hispanic woman. When later asked why he chose his victims, Watts explained that they had evil eyes that needed to be extinguished. Investigators noted the absurdity of this claim since most attacks occurred at night when he could impossibly see their eyes clearly. What made Watts particularly difficult to catch was his deliberate variation in methods. Some victims were stabbed, others strangled, some bludgeoned, and several drowned. He didn't sexually assault his victims, which meant no biological evidence like semen or saliva was left behind. He would sometimes steal small items from victims' shoes, purses, blueprints, and burn them, claiming he needed to kill the spirit. This methodological inconsistency prevented law enforcement from recognizing a pattern. The situation reached a crisis point in 1980 when 5 women were murdered in the Ann Arbor and Detroit area, all on Sunday mornings around 4 a.m. The Ann Arbor newspapers dubbed the perpetrator the Sunday morning slasher. On April 20, 1980, 17-year-old high school student Shirley Small was stabbed twice in the heart outside her home. On July 13, 26-year-old Glenna Richmond was killed in a similar assault near her summer residence. Detective Paul Bunton of the Ann Arbor Police Department became convinced Watts was responsible. He put him under 24-hour surveillance and even confronted him directly, demonstrating the chokehold he believed Watts used on victims. The intense police pressure worked. Watts left Michigan. Unfortunately, he moved to Houston, Texas. In 1981, Houston was experiencing an unprecedented surge in violent crime, earning the grim distinction of being called the murder capital of the United States with over 700 homicides that year. Police were underpaid, understaffed, and overwhelmed. Detective Bunton sent Houston authorities a comprehensive packet including Watts' fingerprints, photographs, highlights of reports, and explicit warnings about his dangerousness. But Houston police, drowning in cases, were unable to maintain the kind of intensive surveillance Michigan had conducted. Watts began killing immediately. Between September 1981 and May 1982, Watts murdered at least 12 women in the Houston area. 22-year-old Linda Tilley was drowned in her apartment complex swimming pool. 25-year-old Elizabeth Montgomery was stabbed to death, and just 2 hours later, 21-year-old Susan Wolfe was stabbed outside her apartment after returning from buying ice cream. 27-year-old Phyllis Tam was attacked while jogging in January 1982. 25-year-old Margaret Fossey was asphyxiated and her body stuffed in the trunk of her car at Rice University. 20-year-old Elena Samander was strangled and left in a trash dumpster. The victims also included 14-year-old Emily Lackway, 34-year-old medical student Anna Ledet, and 21-year-old Yolanda Garcia. The randomness of victim selection, the variety of methods, and the sheer volume of violent crime in Houston meant police didn't initially suspect a single perpetrator. After his arrest at the Lister Aguilar crime scene, Houston prosecutors faced a dilemma. Watts was clearly responsible for multiple murders, but they had virtually no physical evidence beyond his confessions. The families of missing women desperately wanted answers about what had happened to their loved ones. In a controversial decision that would haunt Texas criminal justice for decades, prosecutors offered Watts full immunity for 12 murders, 11 in Texas and 1 in Michigan, in exchange for his detailed confessions and cooperation in locating bodies. He would plead guilty only to burglary with intent to commit murder, a charge carrying a 60-year sentence. Watts accepted the deal and spent more than a week describing how he stalked and killed each victim. Houston homicide detective Tom Ladd drove him to crime scenes where Watts led them to 3 shallow graves. Ladd later described Watts as congenial until you listened to what he was saying. Watts had an excellent memory, never mixing up facts between different murders, providing chilling details about each killing. On September 3, 1982, he was sentenced to 60 years. The judge declared, "I hope they put you so deep in the penitentiary that they'll have to pipe sunlight to you." But before leaving for prison, Watts told Detective Ladd with disturbing calm, "You know, if they ever let me out, I'll kill again." Due to Texas' early release program and good behavior credits, Watts was scheduled for mandatory parole in May 2006. When this became public knowledge in 2004, there was outrage. Andy Cahan, director of victim services for Houston Crime Stoppers, allayed efforts to keep Watts imprisoned, saying, "I guarantee you, if he is released, women are gonna turn up murdered. You do not rehabilitate a serial killer." Michigan authorities intervened. In 2004, Joseph Foy of Westland, Michigan, came forward with crucial testimony. On December 1, 1979, Foy had witnessed from his back porch the murder of 36-year-old Helen Dutcher in Ferndale, a Detroit suburb. He watched as a man chased Dutcher into an alley and stabbed her 12 times. Foy had seen Watts on television in 1982 during his Texas prosecution and recognized him, but it took 2 decades for authorities to follow up. Foy identified Watts by his eyes, which he described as evil and devoid of emotion. Because Watts' immunity deal was specific to Texas, it didn't apply in Michigan. With Foy's eyewitness testimony and the Texas confessions admitted as evidence, Watts was convicted of Dutcher's murder and sentenced to life without parole in late 2004. In July 2007, Watts stood trial for the 1974 murder of Gloria Steele. Despite his pleas of innocence, the jury convicted him, and on September 13, 2007, he received his second life sentence without parole. 1 week later, on September 21, 2007, Coral Eugene Watts died of prostate cancer in the prison ward of a Jackson, Michigan hospital. He was 53 years old. The Watts case exposed catastrophic failures in the American criminal justice system. The controversial immunity deal demonstrated the dangers of prioritizing case clearance over accountability. The fragmentation of law enforcement across jurisdictions allowed a predator to kill for 8 years largely undetected. The case also raised uncomfortable questions about how society evaluates dangerousness and manages repeat violent offenders. Watts had been repeatedly identified as high risk by mental health professionals, yet was released time and again. His case became a catalyst for reform in plea bargaining practices, interagency information sharing, and the development of better systems for tracking violent offenders across state lines. Perhaps most importantly, it served as a reminder that some predators hide in plain sight, moving methodically through communities, and that only coordinated, persistent law enforcement work combined with the courage of witnesses like Joseph Foy and survivors like Melinda Aguilar can bring them to justice.